Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew, and I'm your host for the DevOps session. But before we get started and dive into those details, there's a few things I want to cover off. And first off, I do want to thank all of you, the attendees from this whole week, and the questions, the interactions. That is why we're doing this. A lot of you are familiar with CubeWise, but we are a company that's built on innovation. So whether you're talking to a CubeWiser in the US or someone around the world, they want to, improve things and make things more efficient. And we want to share that knowledge with the larger planning analytics community. Because if you think about this, if we're doing some of these innovations and sharing it with the community, then the developers and the admins, their jobs get better. And then that also trickles down to the end users, the business end users that use planning analytics. And ultimately then they get that best-in-class planning and forecasting application that we all know and love. So the other thing is so that is kind of why we're doing Innovation Week in general. We kicked off this week with getting planning analytics data into Power BI. So Guido, you're the brains behind that, so thank you very much. And that maintains dimensionality and security from planning analytics. And that was a void that was in the marketplace. And that's the other thing is we want to interact with the customers and the people out there. We want to listen to you and kind of, figure out what we need to be working on or what people want. You even heard Marius, if any of you attended the session yesterday, he was like, hey, with Atmosphere, if there's something that's not in a roadmap, reach out, let us know. So after the Power BI, Power Connect, we went on to version V12 on AWS. And that was, setting the scene for what can developers expect with that, and also what can end users, what has changed and what hasn't. And then yesterday we did a launch of Atmosphere, which is serverless cloud functions, which Ian will talk about a little bit later. And then finally, tomorrow, we have faster data processing, so using multi-threading and process orchestration. So all of these sessions, they're being recorded, and we'll be monitoring the chat. And there might be some questions that get pretty specific, so if we don't get to them, we might follow up with you offline. So with that being said, let me kind of introduce the team that is with us today. So we have Rose Morgan, our implementation manager, based outside of Portland. We have Nico, senior engineer, outside of Chicago. Another senior engineer, Guido, based outside of Boston. And then we have Ian, our global practice manager, joining us from London. So what we're going to do today in general is we're going to start very high level talking about DevOps. Then we're going to go into a few more details of DevOps with planning analytics. And we do have two demonstrations coming up. One that is a little more all-encompassing, and Nico's going to do that. That takes a little more development, knowledge, and know-how. And then Ian's going to follow that up with another option that's a little more plug and play. So one thing I'll say before I bring Guido into the conversation, we don't know exactly who attends all these sessions. So this will get pretty technical at times, but I was thinking from that highest level, what is DevOps? And working in a technical environment, especially when it comes to something like a migration of code, people want to reduce risk. And at that highest level, DevOps really is bringing together a few different groups and then putting some processes into place to ensure a desired outcome, essentially reducing risk. So, that sounds pretty basic, but let me tell you, when you get into some of the weeds, it's not quite so basic. So Guido, now kind of over to you on a little more why are we here and what is DevOps?
You tell me. Just kidding. So I'm not sure. I'm a software engineer. I'm sort of entitled to wear this shirt. It works on my machine. I'm really hoping that everybody on this call understands that that's not the right way to think about software engineering and deployment to a production system. So I'm old enough to have lived in a world where there was almost no software at all. And over the decades, I should say, I had my first computer when I was 14, I believe. Over the decades, it has just exploded. Right now, software is everywhere in our lives. And I just want to sort of do a quick survey within our team to see outside of work, right? We work with software every day, but some other aspects of software. Where does it help you? Where do you come in contact with it? So Rose, Can you think of an example where software is important for you?
Sure. I mean, I know from an unfortunate experience of having my car broken into once that there's computers in cars that very much are imperative for making sure that my car runs.
Yeah, excellent example. That has to be sort of production-ready software. Andrea, what about you?
Yeah, going to the grocery store. You know, I use my credit card, use barcode, scan, walk in, buy some food to make a good meal. Yeah, every day.
Let's exchange some recipes. Nicholas.
Washing machine. I do need it to start 3 hours after I go to sleep, so my son doesn't pull it out. It's important.
It's a good one. So, Nicholas, just following up on that. So we heard the car computer, the supermarket. There's a whole transactional thing where money is taken from your account. What's sort of your expectation for all these systems that are in place today that you interact with?
That they fulfill their promises, that they work.
Right. So reliability, right, and precision. So you don't want to go to the supermarket and be charged. Maybe you want to be charged less, but you certainly don't want to be charged more, right? And this is sort of the segue into DevOps, right? So who's responsible for not only the innovation that comes with software development, but also the operation side of things, where you want to make sure that you are reducing the risk for new innovation to break existing things, right? That messes up your user community. You lose a lot of trust. And again, software's everywhere. Your phone, like, there's so much code running on it all the time, right? But it has to be secure and reliable. And again, that's the introduction of DevOps. So DevOps really became more of an industry term starting 2011, 2012, where it was sort of formalized with some wording. But it's really a philosophy in your organization. It's a way of thinking how to approach development and how to make sure that your development gets in a good place in your production environment. So you have that stability. There is tooling involved, right? So Nicholas is going to show you some of those industry standard DevOps tools that are used for what they are called pipelines. But then we'll see from Ian as well what you can do for testing, particularly with planning analytics. But as I said, it's more a way of thinking. So really, you need the development team, the operations team agree on certain parameters, make an assessment, definition of goals, and then start working on this effort together. Okay, with that, I'm going to so Nicholas, can you just quickly comment on those tools?
Sure. Let me share my screen. Oops, there it is. Second. Okay. So here we have three set of tools, three possibilities. And ones we're going to be talking about are these subsets here. This is where the demo is going to be, but there are many more ways in which you can get started in this DevOps journey. Rose, you want to take
Yeah,
the
and
IBM
I
one?
guess, yeah, I'll jump in. I think, Nico, I think when we had chatted previously, another thing to talk about is just that DevOps is also the collaboration, right? It's more than just the tools, right? So maybe I'll just throw that in. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that before I jump into this examples here.
Yeah, so I think again, the tools are enablers, but if you don't have the spirit of DevOps, I know it sounds quirky, but it is important that you understand that nothing will be done automatically. You need to have that collaboration spirit. So you need to make sure that whenever you develop something, you build a test for it, and that will ensure that we are all reliable for the code we do. So it's a way of thinking and a way of working rather than just a simple set of tools.
Great, thank you. So, right, we talked about how there can be tools, and there are a whole host of different tools that could be options. And so we've just done a very small subset here. So when we think about kind of the core tenets of DevOps, of what a tool should provide for DevOps, it would be version control, it would be migration, approvals of those migrations, and then also unit testing. So the first one we want to highlight here is the IBM Planning Analytics Workspace. So with some of the more recent versions that have come out for Workspace, we're seeing the version control and the migration being addressed there. And this is really helpful for companies in certain situations. And I'll turn over to the team to come to discuss a couple of those. It can work with any Git compatible repository. So the way it interacts with them is via the web. So it could be Azure, it could be, GitLab, GitHub, any of those things. So Nico, do you want to talk about a client that we were working with recently for V12 where this was helpful?
Yes, so we had our first, this was our first V12 client where we needed to deploy from our development environment, as they call it now, to the production one. And the only way to do that, again, because V12, there are no more files available, the only way to do that is through version control through, in this case, with GitHub. But as you said, it could be GitLab, it could be Azure, AWS code commit, anything that you want. So that was that's the only way to migrate the code, and it's also good because you get version control with it. You cannot automate it, but you have version control, which is really good.
Yeah, and we also, let me just jump, we also had another customer that had to kind of work within the confines of their firewall. So we were able to use GitLab, and then they were able to use the PA integrated services there. So that was another example too.
Great. All right, so then let's talk about another set of tools that we have out there. And these are some more CubeWise products, right? So obviously we're always really proud of the development and the tools that we have that have been really innovative in the market. And so specifically, we want to talk about Arc Plus, which is a combination of both Arc and Pulse. And Ian's going to go into some of this in more detail towards the end of our demo. But I just want to call out, right? If you've been using Pulse, you already know that there's migration capabilities within Pulse, and that includes approval capabilities of that to make sure that that is, somebody can review that before it's fully migrated from a development to a production environment. And then we've also developed recently Test Center within Arc to help with some of that unit testing. And Ian will be focusing on that later. But before we get to that, I want to turn it over to Nico to talk about a specific example of using Jira, Jenkins, and GitHub. This is a more encompassing one. It is something that is not going to be pre-built. So one of the benefits of Arc Plus is that's a pre-built solution. This is going to have, it's going to be more customizable for you, but it would require a little bit more effort. So Nico, you want to jump through this, kind of what's involved with this?
Sure, absolutely. So the idea here is to show you a bit of a timeline, right? Like what scenario we're going to be facing. And we're going to be using the main purpose is to show you how, with the use of Jenkins, with GitHub, and with Jira, we can make a full-blown CI/CD deployment to promote TM1 code from development to production. So the reason why we chose Jenkins or Jira or GitHub is not specific. It's not that they have something that no other tool has. Actually, GitLab offers all of these three things combined. But the idea is that we can show you the versatility of these applications, and primarily because if in the company that you're working, they already have a DevOps team, most likely these are the tools that they're going to be using, or at least one of them. So here we go. I'm going to share the example. So starting point for us is basically we have two TM1 instances, a DevOps Dev and a DevOps Prod. They're both in sync. They both have the same set of code. They're in sync with a TM1 DevOps repository. The processes are there. They're the same ones that are in the instances. And we also have here a ticket in Jira. A ticket stating that from the product owner say, we just bought Atmosphere, so we want to install this and have this in the DevOps instances. So what we're going to do, sorry, before jumping ahead, in this ticket that was created, this is where the DevOps culture and discipline needs to start to come into place. So if you see, we have this ticket is called, it has a key called DD22. Just remember that key for the future, because this is the part where automation and discipline go side by side. This ticket is in the to-do list, so let's get to it. Here we're going to be using a plugin in Arc that is in beta, so I'm going to warn that. I'm hoping it works, but we're going to use it to install all the Atmosphere processes. And while that's done, I'm going to hand it over to Ian to explain what Atmosphere is, because it's a new thing. Ian?
Yeah, so there was a demonstration of it yesterday. I believe Marius did one for the Atmosphere serverless functions. They're functions and connectors for TM1 that operate in the cloud or serverless. So these TI processes, which Nico is just installing, call an Atmosphere function, which does, I can see the SharePoint import one there, just running. That goes and imports data via the TI into TM1. So you just run that TI process and it connects TM1 to SharePoint.
Perfect.
So now you've installed.
Yes, they installed it. Two that didn't. I'll again, we're better tasting this, but it's if you see all other Atmosphere processes have been included, and it's important so that you don't think I'm cheating. They're not here in production either, right? So once we do this in the DevOps world, what we need to do every time we include new code is to make sure we test it, right? Even if it's unit testing. In this case, these are processes. So, and I created a test Atmosphere process that will be executed as part of, before pushing this code anywhere else. But if we're talking about a ticket that is, add 3 more products to what I mentioned, or modify a rule because something went wrong, every time we do a code addition or a fix, we need to work on a process that checks that actually works. So that's a big component of it. And I'm going to run it so that you see that it actually works. Again, these are placeholders. As you see, there's a server wait, but I think you will get the idea that every time we do a fix or an addition, we need to do a testing. And so with that, what I'll do here is I'm going to push this new set of code, all of these Atmosphere processes, into GitHub, and I'm going to do that by running this process. And here is where some of the discipline and the automation comes into play. So I do have a main branch, the one I showed you, and I'm not going to commit directly into the main branch. That would be not following DevOps rules. I'm going to create a new branch based on main called DD22 and call it Atmosphere, because this is what we're deploying. And I'm going to also name, do my comment DD22 saying installing Atmosphere processes, right? And here I'm going to use my user and password for GitHub. So I'm going to, from here, I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to run this. So
Nicholas,
what you see.
Why
Yes,
create
please.
a new branch? What is that? Was it useful?
Why create a new branch? That's a good question. So there are 2 main reasons. One is because I blocked any direct commits to the main branch. The main branch is production code. You never want to modify production code directly without going through a series of steps. What we just did is a unit test. It's a test of a single thing that was added, not a system or a global system test. So that's why we create a separate branch in order to deploy this. And now that this run, what you'll see is that a new DD22 branch was created, and GitHub is letting us know this. So aside from that, because of this discipline that we have, if you see without me touching anything, this ticket should be moved to in progress. So you don't have to rely on developers to move and create comments. It just does it for us. And so one of the things we can do now is we can do a pull request. I'll show what that is in here. So as I mentioned before, when Guido asked, we're going to enforce in the DevOps way some reviews and approval. Here it's saying that one approved is required before merging something into main, because again, it's production code. So I'm going to choose Guido as the reviewer. I'm going to say DD22 submitting pull request for atmosphere. And I'm going to create this. Did it? Yes. And so a couple of things are happening right now. Yes.
Can you just explain real quick what a pull request is?
Exactly. Yes. A pull request is basically a permission for modifying a main branch. And so what it will do is, in this case, I chose you as the approver. What you will see now is that you're going to get an email saying this new set of code is attempting to be merged into the main branch. You can review it and then approve it.
Okay, so for the audience, what happened on my end? So I'm looking at the GitLab screen as well, and I got the pull request, the approval for it, and just to comment on that, so that this can be deeper than what we are showing you, right? So depending on the depth of the ticket, right? The ticket can be moved from on-premise to AWS, right, or to TA Cloud, and then you make sub-steps around that, and then each sub-step has its own like approval and change requests and all those kind of things. So that's like a big picture item, right? But then it can also be enhancement requests. It can be bug fixes, so minor things. So depending on the type of request, the approval for your pull request can take a longer amount of time, right? Maybe product management gets involved to review how a specific feature is implemented and if that aligns with the expectations of your customers, of your user community. So this is not just the click of a button and done. There's the technical code review involved, as well as other things depending again on the depth of the feature. Back to you, Niklas.
Yes, thank you. And so what just happened was that in here, first of all, Guido approved it, and then there was something that automatically plugged in, which was Jenkins. Jenkins is constantly listening to what happens in this GitHub repo, and it noticed there was a PR, a pull request, and because of it, it kicked off an automatic build. So you won't be able to see it. There was a test instance that got spin up at the very beginning, right? And we had that spin up because since there was no testing being done, we didn't need it. But this execution called the test instance. It built the pull request. It means that it took the pull request from GitHub and installed it directly, all the Atmosphere processes inside the test instance, and it run a series of steps. These steps I'm going to share with you are, for us, this can be customized to whatever your company needs. But essentially, we did a refresh of metadata from SharePoint. We did a refresh of dimensions from Snowflake. We refresh exchange rates, we refresh from Certinia, we refresh Salesforce. So all the data is as big as production. And then we run some validation. So we validated the P&L numbers match with the balance sheet ones where they need to. We validated the sales with Salesforce, depending if that's something that is interested. And we also validated numbers between one cell in one cube in one TM1 instance versus another one in another TM1 instances, because that kind of implementation generally happens where we have the same data in different cubes at different granularity, even in different TM1 instances. So all of that can be encompassed in here and tested. Then what we did is we run system tests. So here, another component of DevOps is we don't want to deploy things to production that work on their own, but then make everything worse, right? So I identify these 3 processes on my model that are key, like a copy version, an export to SAP, and a static version, right? So for those, what I did is basically I run them all in parallel and I analyze the results. Are they meeting the SLAs? Are their performance decreased because of the new atmosphere processes? Now that wouldn't happen, but if you're modifying a rule, you might want to check whether these processes got worse or better. So anyway, in this case, it passed. Then it's shutting down the test instance again because we don't need it. We don't need to waste resources on that. And then the deploy to production and to support has not happened because it's not part of it. But now when we go back, everything is green. Reader approved. Jenkins says the commit looks good. And if we go to Jira, you should see that it's ready to deploy. Now it was in the interim, it was in testing, but because the build was so fast, it moved from testing to ready to deploy. Generally speaking, this is a demo. Generally speaking, builds can take longer. Or if you're doing a massive test, it can happen. So you can rest at ease. Whenever it's being tested, it's going to let you know, and whenever it's done, it's going to make it ready to deploy. So since everything is checked and we have a green light, we're going to confirm this merge. And what will happen right now? Yes.
I was just wondering, could we talk more about how you scripted the testing that you did?
Yes, so in this case, we have, this could be anything. This could be a batch process. This could be a set of TI processes. This could be a rush TI, for example, that runs, right, and does a lot of their testing. Could be using TM1 Pi. It could be anything you want, as long as it's because Jenkins can call anything you want. That's the beauty of it, and that's why it's so flexible. In this case, this is TM1, but in many organizations, you will see that this also calls a build, so you can check out code from Java and run a program. And if your TM1 instance is depending on a source system, for example, you could also call that source system to be built before you actually run your tests in TM1.
So Nico, this seems quite in depth. Like, what would you say is the amount of time that you spend or you have spent building this kind of stuff for a demo against, I don't know, the time you spend building the TM1 model itself for the demo?
So the integration component is not that hard to do. I would say this wouldn't take more than a couple of days. But agreeing on what should be tested, agreeing on if it's dependent on another source system, that's the thing that is going to take a bit longer. Getting into an agreement on how we organize our development work so that this can be enabled. Because again, above any other tools, above any other code, this is a way of working, it's a way of collaborating, it's a culture. So that's the most important piece. And if you see here, this is the main branch got updated because we merged that code, so atmosphere processes are there. And it did check some environment variables, as it always should. It didn't do all the testing and refreshing the data and metadata because this is production. It deployed to production, but it also deployed to support. And this is a good thing. You don't want to, if tomorrow you have a ticket, you don't want to check. You need to probably shut down the production support instance, takes the production instance, updating. You can do all of these things at once and automate it. So you're always ready to act on a specific ticket. Then we set up some security, and that was pretty much it. So now if we go here and refresh, you're going to see hopefully that the atmosphere processes are in production, which is good. And also because this ticket, this deployment happened, hopefully there it is, it's done. And if I refresh, I don't know why I have to refresh on this, but now you see a little cloud. And it says view deployment information. And because we were disciplined enough to put that DD22 all over the place, you can see that there was a branch DD22 that is created. And if you want to go to GitHub and review it, it's available from here. You can see what everything looked like. You can also see the commits that were made and who did it, how many files were modified, the pull requests that was made by whom and when, what was the build like. If you want to see like traces of the build, you can go here and it can tell you exactly what happened. So if we go to build, deploy to production, you see here all of this was done. It created all the atmosphere process in here. It updated some others, etc., etc., etc. So this is again a full-blown CI/CD implementation of how to migrate objects using this set of tools.
Yeah, and Nico, just let me jump in for a second. So what I find interesting too about this is you said, this is highly customizable. And you talk about getting different teams together. So, each company is going to have kind of their own different path of what they kind of want done, and bringing those people together and kind of defining that process. We see that in lots of different businesses, whether we're talking DevOps or even how they, do some of their planning and forecasting. So that seems like one of maybe the challenges of getting started, though, is defining that process if it doesn't already exist. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and one of the things I can say from experience is that this is generally going to be brought to your attention as a TM1 developer, product owner, or something. We're getting more because of what Guido commented at the beginning, right? This is not just a TM1 thing. This is how all mainstream applications work these days. Nobody just deploys to production or shuts down an instance and copying and paste files anymore, right? What we are attempting to show you what we're attempting to show you here is that now with this implementation, with the flexibility that it has, and with TM1 Pi under the hood for doing some of these things, TM1 can play with the big boys in the IT world. Because if this is, I've seen this implementation being enforced in many companies, and at that time they said, how do we do this? Is it possible even to do this? Yes, it is possible, and I think we just proven it.
Nico, there's a question from the chat from Matthew.
Sure.
Wants to know, this was a live deployment to the prod instance. It wasn't part of an automated deployment. Just can you explain a little bit about how that happened?
This was, sorry, an automated deployment.
So it's a live deployment. So we didn't stop the instance and bring it back up.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So because we're using the Git APIs developed by IBM, this deployment was like at any point we stopped the instance.
Thanks. Sorry, Rose, I got to crush you.
We only stopped and started the instances for development and testing because we don't need them to be up and running all the time. We just need it for specific purposes.
Thanks.
Great. So the thing is, this, like, as we said, this is kind of more the all-encompassing position that a company could take. We do also have another option that Ian will show us very shortly.
Yeah.
Ian?
So yeah, I'll take the screen now. Thanks, Nico. Thanks, Andrea. This one here. Okay, nice. Okay, I'm just going to log back into Pulse while I'm here. So most of you will have heard of Pulse before. This has been around for almost 10 years now. I've just failed to log into it again. There we go. So Pulse has been around for, as I said, for 10 years. It's a Cubewise product. It helps us do monitoring and migration and change control and some kind of validation reports and some kind of reporting on user statistics and that kind of thing for many years. What's happened now with the deployment of Arc Plus, which is customers who have Pulse and also use Arc as a development tool, they now talk to each other a lot more than they have done previously. And some of the Pulse functionality you can see in Arc, and some of the Arc stuff we can push back to Pulse. So they're talking to each other a lot more, and it means as a developer, we're in the same place and we're using the same tools to do our development and our migration as well. So whereas Nico showed something which was a lot of very good tools put together to create the chain, what Arc and Pulse is more one product. So Arc, as we call it, Arc Plus. So you can be in the same window or in the same login and do most of your work. So this is Pulse. As you can see, there are model spotlights and migration stuff in there already. I won't go into that too much, but if you do want to delve further into Pulse, then I contact anyone on this call, Andrea or James, and we can organise a walkthrough of that. What I really want to talk about is the testing in Arc Plus. So for those who haven't seen it, this is Arc. This is a development area where we can create cubes, processes, dimensions, normal things that you would do in TM1. And as a TM1 developer, I often get into this situation where I've loaded data in and I'm looking at that data and I know that data is correct. And in my head, I'm doing the test, but it's not recorded. It's not a test that we can replicate. And what we want to do with this new functionality in Arc Plus is give us the ability to save those tests and run those tests again and again and again, so that if we do make changes further down the line, or if we finish off building the TI process, we can make sure that that number is always correct and always comes back to the same thing. For example, here I've loaded some revenue data, gross revenue, into year 2020. So 4 years ago, this is actual data. This data should never change. I know that number is correct, weirdly, because that was my phone number. So I know it's correct. I'm going to add this number to a unit test. So I'm going to go just right click here. It's context aware in Arc. I'm just right clicking and I've got the add to unit test button there now. So because it's context aware, it knows, I did it twice. It knows I wanted to assert that a value in the income statement cube is a specific value, sorry. So here's the address, the cube address from where I just came from. I want to say that equals 6804353, which was the number. I'm going to click OK on that. And let's just test that just to make sure I'm not lying. And all it's doing here is it's logging into the TM1 instance, because I'm already in Arc, I've already logged in, and it's just testing that cell value. So it's just doing a cell get n. And this is without a TI process going in and running this. This is non-invasive into the TM1 model. It's just going through the API and checking that number. So that was my assertion, the check income value. I'm just going to give this a category, which is my income statement tests, and I'll save it here. And that adds up to my list of unit tests, which I'm building up as I'm developing my model. So as a developer, I can write my code and I can test that code at the same time. And then my manager can come in and they can look at all of the tests for the code that I've done this week or for the bug that I'm looking at, and they can make sure that I've done adequate testing for the piece of work that I've done. And in most instances, prior to this kind of thing, you say, have you tested it? And to Guido's t-shirt, yes, I tested it. It worked when I ran the process. But we might not have always done all of the tests for that. And the reason I asked Nico the question before is, if you imagine you've got a TI process with just one if statement in it, to test that properly, you do two tests. You do one test for a pass and one test for a fail. So an if statement is two tests. If I was running a TI process which accepted a parameter, that's generally three tests. You need a good parameter, a bad parameter, and a null parameter. So you'll build those tests up, and naturally you do this as a TM1 developer. You run the process, you make a change, you run it again, just to make sure you are getting to the line of code you're expecting to get to. And historically, we've been ASCII outputs everywhere for this kind of thing. So yeah, so just to take you through one of the other tests here, I'm just going to go to this unit test here, which is a dimensional test. It's account 499 exists. So in the account dimension, I'm expecting an account called 499 to exist. What I'm going to do here is nothing in the setup. There's no pre-processing to this. I want the model as it is currently. I'm going to run the load accounts process. I'm not going to do a cleanup, but if you wanted to, you could clean up if you loaded a dummy account or something like that. And my assertion of this is two assertions. One is that the dimension element exists. So it's going to check the account dimension for an element called 4999. And I'm looking on the principal name, but I could just easily look on the alias or attribute or something like that. OK, that's fine. And I'm also going to say the process that I ran, the load accounts process, completed successfully. If that process completes successfully and 499 exists, I know my process is built correctly and I can go on to the next thing. It's also a valid test to say, actually, the process should fail. The process should abort because 499 should already exist, and I'm expecting my TI process to abort at that point. The reason we like to do this is when you're writing code for something like, I don't know, a dimension element already exists and the process has to abort or a process has to process quit. Sometimes you want to make sure that the process actually does complete successfully, or you have the relevant error message being written back to the user to say why it aborted. You don't necessarily want a process to abort with just a fail message and nothing going back to the user. It's good practice to build the code that fails gracefully and gives the user the error message that they're expecting back as well. So those are the unit tests that we build up. So I'm just going to check this test as well, just to make sure it works. Obviously, smoke and mirrors here, that process ran really quickly and it passed because, of course, it did. And I've got my collections of tests here. So I've got my Innovation Week tests, which are all of these tests that I've built. One will fail because I know it fails because I put some bad data in there to fail on purpose. But then my manager or the business owner could come in and they can run these tests and they can say, all of the tests pass. I'm happy with the work. Now we can go and create our migration package to migrate that to production. And this is where Arc and Pulse talk to each other. And this information will be available in Pulse to the users as well. Following on what Nico was saying, you can also do your global tests or your system tests or regression tests, however you call them, just to make sure that I've done my bit of work for my particular bug. Now I'm going to go and run a global test to make sure I haven't broke anything. For example, my balance sheet is still 0, and off they go. And you can run all of those tests, and I should fail one of these, I think, as well. So that's how the Arc Test Center is built, for the developer to do their tests and to save their tests and be able to keep rerunning them again and again. And it saves time in the developer's life cycle to have these bank of tests that know I haven't broke anything, or in my case, I have broke something, which is not a surprise given I wanted to. So that's where Arc Plus comes in. Sorry, Rose. Yeah.
A question from the chat, which is that can these test cases and results from Arc be exported?
So we can get at them, not at the moment. At the moment, we're still building the API in Pulse to surface the historical results. They'll be available in Pulse through the Kibana search, I think it is, or the Elasticsearch. That's where we'll get up and pull them out. But yes, you should be able to export them from there as well. They're just sitting in the Pulse database. If you did have a Pulse login, which I know a lot of you do, if you've got Pulse before, to go and interrogate that database, you can just write your own TI code to pull them straight out. But it's yet to be confirmed which table they actually sit in. So I don't want to say they can now, but they definitely will be in the next release or two.
I have a
so
question,
James, if you,
Ian.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I was just wondering, so if you have multiple parameters for a TI, right? TI processes don't necessarily have just one. But it's not time parameter times 3. Because you got to catch maybe some combinations of parameters, right? Maybe some are related. So what I'm trying to get at is the writing your tests. That's really you need to put some thought into understanding your code before you write your tests. Is that true?
Yeah, 100%. You've got to understand that. For example, if you've got a piece of code which accepts 2 parameters, one's a count, one's year, and you were to validate in your TI process p account equals null as one of your first lines of codes, and if it equals null, you do process quit. Obviously, then you don't need to do another test that says, what if I get a null account and a null year, because you know your code will have already quit before you're checking the year thing. So you've got to understand what your code is to be able to test it properly and efficiently. But yeah, and it helps you to actually write your code and write your validations in the code in a better way if you understand the tests. Because you might look at it and go, well, it's more likely somebody's going to give me a bad parameter in the account dimension than a year dimension, because years are easy. Years are 4-digit numbers. More likely somebody's going to give me a proper year than an account, which might be a piece of string, which might have a comma in it, might not have a comma in it, all of that stuff. So it actually helps you build better code. Once you test it and you understand what you're testing, you can go back and correct your inefficient code in your actual TI processes.
Good point. If you
Great. Well, thank you for that, Ian. So, you did see 2 different options here, but these are just a few. There are other tools out there that can be used. So Guido, I kind of want to bring you back into the conversation around, how would a company kind of get started on this path?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, right? So I'm glad that we have today the ability to record these meetings because there was a certain complexity to some of the things that were shown. And then going back to maybe revisit some of that might be helpful for maybe do a little bit of research and all that. But I would say to get started, right? So what Nicolas said earlier, if you're in a large organization that already has an ecosystem around DevOps, right? It's likely that you don't have choices, right? So there's a full-blown Jenkins, Jira, ticketing system, what have you, already in place. Now you come with planning analytics, and the organization is going to ask you, well, you have this, there's like mission critical data in there. We need to make sure that this production system is always up and running. What are you doing for DevOps, right? And then it's a little bit, so of course, going to be an iterative process, right? So you need to understand the existing systems. How can TM1 or Planning Analytics tie into that? So there's the Git integration, but that's not the only way. So you can also look at metadata, for instance, via the REST API directly without the Git portion. So now TM1 looks a lot more like actual code than it has before the release of the REST API, and then later on the release of the Git portion in Planning Analytics of the REST API. So now, again, you got it. It's going to be a lot involvement by IT, right? Because that's usually the organization running these things. So you have your TM1 developers. They need to understand the check-in process. What's a pull request? How do I do that? How do I look at my tickets, etc. So you got to get involved in all these procedures to be completely there, right?
To add to that, what I would say is
Yes.
again, it will pretty much, the implementation will depend on how you work with TM1. How many developers do you have? Do you have one developer for each application you have one in many? Do you have multiple in one? Do they spin up their own TM1 instances to work on a bug fix? Keep those things in mind. Anything is possible. That's the great thing about all of what we've shown. But agreeing on how to proceed is going to be, and spending time in it, integrating things is easy, but only if you know how they will behave. And that's the important piece about DevOps. This is why you need your team to be aligned on how they're going to work together.
Right, good point. So the opposite of that is you have nothing in place today, right? And by nothing, I don't mean literally nothing. Maybe you make an IT backup of your database, right? That could be considered sort of a very minimalistic DevOps because you can always go back if something breaks. But there's some time costs associated with that, right? Maybe your production instance is going to be down for 2 hours because it's loading the backup now. So if you're starting from scratch, again, putting aside those very minimalistic approaches, and I'm not saying it's bad thing. Making backups is the most valuable thing you can do right to begin with. But then the next iteration of that would be, okay, I need to find a source control system. Like Git is very popular, but there are many others out there. I think Google and AWS, they have their own flavor of that. And then you learn, right? So not every TM1 developer is going to necessarily overlap with the skill set that someone who is involved in DevOps has, right? So maybe there's some resourcing considerations. The next thing you might want to say is, okay, now I have a source control system, that's great. I understand branching, how that works in a multi-developer team. Now I want to add an approval process, right? Someone has to go in, look at the pull request, look at the code, and say, okay, this is good. I'm approving this code to be merged into production. And then again, you build up on this, right? So now you have maybe automated testing, right? Some of the things that Ian has shown, or you build your own, right? Rose mentioned this earlier. If you build your own DevOps sort of environment, there's definitely an upfront cost to it, but the benefits later on may outweigh that upfront cost, right? So once you have everything going, everybody's integrated, everybody understands the systems, knows where to look, and as Nicholas has pointed out, just naming things same makes all these components work together like marvelously, right? So you can look here, okay, what happened? Here's my check-in, here's the ticket, and here's the test that ran, et cetera, et cetera. And then you automate that on a nightly basis, and move on, right? Again, continuous improvements, obviously. So we wanted to share this with you to maybe raise your interest. But the other part that I just don't want to dismiss, right, is we're talking about planning analytics. So in TM1, so we talked a lot about unit testing, right? So I'm checking one number, or I'm checking a parameter, I'm checking the length of a string, or something along those lines, right? That's easy. But in TM1, right, if you talk about migration, there are these dependencies, right? So I add an attribute to a dimension. Now I'm writing a rule that calculates the value. And now I'm writing a API process that loads the attribute values from a SQL source. I already touched 3 things just for one attribute, right? And the key, well, that's the third thing. So there's all these dependencies, right? So you're testing for those kind of dependencies can go way beyond what you're doing just with unit testing. So you're making sure that Pulse is a great tool to identify these dependencies. So you're making sure that here are the things that are touched, right? Your source control system will understand that, but then it also can add some tests to ensure that these dependencies are enforced. So, right? So if I migrate this attribute, I need this rule and this TI process, right? So you kind of can make sure. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it back.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Guido. I mean, so kind of even just summarizing what you said, it depends on where your company is. And it's kind of like, you need to be able to run before you can walk. So, kind of figure out where you are and maybe how to get started. It's going to be different for everyone. So the thing is, I think we are wrapping up. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for the team. And, reach out if you have any additional questions. I know there's some more coming through in the chat. Reach out on our CubeWise website. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this is about doing good TM1. So we appreciate you guys turning up and appreciate the work from the team. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye.